Welcome to the Serious TV Drama Podcast. I'm Scott, and joining me once again this week... Wait, is he the Lennon or is he McCartney? Nah, screw it. He's Ringo, which makes me Yoko, and you, the listeners, well, you know, you're still you, but you won having drinks with us at an auction. Anyway, our co-host, everybody's co-host, it's Brian. Hey, Brian.
Co-host for hire, all-time quarterback. Good evening.
I love how my introductions each week are getting more dopely convoluted. We are back this week for our HBO double feature of Succession and Perry Mason. Now, once again, if you don't watch both, hopefully you've checked the segment breakdown to know when either to start or stop and such. I love saying and such, and now I noticed that at least one character on Succession says and such, which made me very happy. Mm-hmm. It's the little things, you know. So speaking of which, let us get started with the latest episode of Succession, which was titled Rehearsal. Now, this episode covers the Roys on the eve, and I believe it was the eve, of a couple notable events. Big one being the vote and sale of Waystar to Gojo, and specifically Lucas Matson, played with a certain laid-back yet still somehow intense Alexander Skarsgård, and the seemingly less important event in the eyes of all the Roys except maybe one, the wedding of Connor and Willa. But before we get to Connor, who I think may very well steal this episode, I think we need to continue that little concept of marriage in general, or more appropriately, the dissolution of one. So we're going to pick up again this week with the situation with Shiv and Tom. Now, Shiv has a completely astute belief from the get-go of this episode that Tom is essentially conflicting out all the potential divorce lawyer sharks in the metropolitan area of, New York City. Because even though there's probably like 20,000 lawyers in New York, I really find that hard to believe, but whatever. Shiv knows Tom, despite his really unconvincing deflections, is clearly using her dad's playbook. And be it the concern of the actual split of monies post-divorce, or to simply stick another knife, or should we say a shiv, in her dad's back. Come on. Their names are so precise. This clearly motivates her to reconnect with that Sandy Furness character, who was the daughter of, Sandy Furness, the media giant who once tried to take over Waystar and has since had a seat on the Waystar board. Now, as we see in those opening few minutes via phone conversation and then a meeting, Shiv indicates she's open to working with Sandy and, oh yay, Stewie, we haven't seen him for a bit, to vote against the deal to hold out for more money from Matson. Now, I'll stop here by saying, if it delays and upsets her dad, but the sale still goes through, then okay, she gets more money, which helps her cover the deal for Pierce and then some. But if it kills the sale, that also kind of kills her dad, which would mean Shiv and her siblings would have to back out of their Pierce deal. But as we can see from the Roy's attitude and conversation at the beginning of this episode, while they are watching a PGN show, you start to wonder, are they really even all that interested in this? Or has this all been just to play keep away from their dad?
I get the sense that Roman's the only one that sees that this is personal and not business. And several times in the episode, but certainly at the beginning, he says, and to also maybe put this all to bed, like he kind of wants it over with. I think because he wants to be a part of all of their lives. But I think for Shiv and Kendall, it's personal. And I think that's why we'll get there later, but there's a turn that Kendall takes that I think goes away you don't expect. Later in the episode, but that I think gives you a hint that it's more personal for him than business too. So I think it is that. And I was really, really, intrigued by the idea that, Logan advised Tom, or Tom sought the counsel of Logan and went out and ran the playbook to keep all the best divorce lawyers off Shiv's retainer.
Right.
Because there might be 20,000 lawyers, but to handle a complicated divorce like that, there are a handful of lawyers in any given place. I mean, even here where I am, the doctors at the hospital that work here there was a certain lawyer here years ago that they all kept on retainer so that their spouses couldn't go hire that lawyer in the event there was an impending divorce. So very, very realistic. And I thought that was a nice touch by the writers.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, and of course you're absolutely right. I mean, I jokingly said there's 20,000 lawyers here, but only a select few are going to handle such major high profile cases such as this where so much money is involved. And the only catch being in a place like New York, you're going to probably run into more of those because of just the per capita, ratio of millionaires, that might be here compared to other places. That doesn't mean she can't go and get a lawyer from LA or Houston or wherever, and which is probably where I believe they're going to go. And hopefully there'll be some interesting casting for whoever that lawyer turns out to be, because that's a part you can probably have a little bit of fun with. Also, staying on that track just for a moment, it also, even though I not only we agreed upon it, I think every viewer, who watches agrees upon it. Okay, Tom is clearly going to be going after stuff here, because you're not doing that and hoping for it to be just a nice, easy, amicable divorce. Even though it's not that Tom doesn't come from money himself, but it ain't Roy money. And if Logan himself is doing any form of coaching here, which it seems pretty apparent, then that's an interesting dynamic I don't think I've ever seen before, that the father would be helping the person who married one of his children in a divorce proceeding rather than the other way around. The more you think about it, the more unique it is, and the more screwed up that makes the Roys, quite frankly.
Right. And it brings a crushing reality that it's about money more than anything. I mean, why else would you do that but to protect your money and protect his interest? And really, he sees their divorce through the lens of himself.
Right. It's money. And as they probably have already said, and they should say, when it's money, it's power. And that's what it's between, because him trying to cement his place there and Logan trying to maintain his place as well. And if he can undercut one of the people who are looking, whether it be the Pierce deal or anything else, you take that potential money away from them. That decreases whatever power they may have over you, especially after what just happened in the previous episode where they actually flexed and at least temporarily won for a change. Now, meanwhile, everyone is on high alert over at ATN as Greg is frantically reaching out to Tom to tell him that Logan is there, walking the floor. And I'll say that Greg peels off some of the episode's best lines as he describes how Logan is terrifyingly moseying around as he's wearing sunglasses. It's as if Santa was a hitman. And I will say right now, and I know I'm sure like every other podcast or article that's covered this series, probably does a thing where they, the most notable quotes from the episode. And if they don't, they should, because of all the shows I've watched over the last several years, there's probably not one that has as many standout quotes as a show like Succession. Even the great Better Call Sauls. No offense to Mr. Gilligan and McGould, but oh my God, the lines they rip off on this are amazing. And the line that caught my heart, of two, one is going to come later, but here is, it's like Jaws if everyone in Jaws worked for Jaws.
Yeah, that was a great line.
It's such a great line. Now, and throughout the ATN sequence of events, there are really some great, I call them darkly comic bits that are sprinkled throughout those scenes. Most of them are actually connected to, I would call it an apparent audition tape for Carrie, Logan's mistress, right-hand woman, assistant, and apparently a tack dog for anyone named Greg. It was funny how much play, both literally and figuratively, that got throughout the episode. And you start to think about whether there's, and what possible ramifications happens from little events that happen around that video.
Yeah, it's, It was like a running gag that started funny and ended not funny, because it grows more serious, the reaction she has to it and where she leaves it. And I sort of had the feeling as I watched this episode, and you can tell me what you think, they positioned her as possibly a more formidable opponent than some of Logan's past people. I know the character played by Holly Hunter was supposed to be a big deal, but they've sort of shown the rise of this woman and her influence on Logan and how much she means to him. And they've intentionally had her start off being the subject of multiple sort of sexist jokes about what she does with him. And when she leaves Greg, by the time she leaves Greg, you get the sense she's not stupid. She's not, an empty head that's trying to audition for that she might have more influence. They might be overplaying their hand. And if Greg and Tom aren't careful, they might be in trouble with her too. I think she might be the wild card this season that we see something really unexpected happen. If you wanted to really throw a Hail Mary, she could marry Logan and end up with the whole empire and everybody's on the outs if he changes his will before he dies, if we go that route or whatever. But the airtime and the storyline they've given her, I think, set her up as something a little more significant than what we've seen in past seasons.
I don't disagree. That's probably a lot of that is kind of interesting hypothesizing for the rest of the season, and I think there's a lot there to chew on. There are also, I think, by the events that happened in this episode, the fact that, as you say, initially it's kind of a joke, especially when we see that somehow, Kendall and Roman and them are actually watching. They've gotten a hold of it and they're watching it and they keep playing it over and over and laughing at it, and how it's making its rounds through the ATN location and how people are reacting to it. And Logan is obviously keenly aware of this. He's truly viewed it himself already, and I don't know if this is quite a. Even though I thought there was a little bit of a riff there, it was a little bit of. I thought, are we going Citizen Kane here? Are we? I mean, and for those of you who haven't seen Citizen Kane, other than come on, go. You should see Citizen Kane. Come on. One of the major things in Citizen Kane is his belief that one of the women that he falls in love with and eventually marries, or falls in love in quotation marks, because whether Charles Russell Kane really truly loves anyone is debatable, I guess. But he believes her to be like this amazing potential opera singer and whatever, and she's really not. And he does. There's a famous meme of him standing up and clapping. That's he was like the only one sticking up for her. A lot of the movie revolves around that, and you start seeing, I wonder if that's going to be the case with Kerry. Is Logan going to have this false belief that she should be like the next up and coming ATN anchor? We see in this episode, no, he does not think that. And he's very, and even though he put it out there, and he's still very, sensitive, shall we say, to anyone mocking it, as we see in that great scene when he comes into the conference room, and clearly we know that Hugo, the Fisher Stevens character, and Jerry have been watching it, and I think he comes in right when Hugo is laughing his ass off and, quickly closes the laptop. And then one of the best tension moments in the entire episode was them insisting on him opening. It's like, oh, no, it's like, no, I can't. Like, it looks like the light's still. You can put it on, because he knows once he opens it up, and there's that flicker of her on the screen, and Logan sees it, and I'm going, oh, this is going to come back to bite poor little Hugo pretty soon. I think it kind of bites Jerry already in this episode. I also wonder, however, because we have that scene when, because Logan passes the buck. He hasn't, he wants his hands clean of this. And it's almost comical the way he does it, which is rare because Logan doesn't do things in a very comical way. But Tom does, because then Tom passes that buck over to Greg, and then we get that scene of Greg essentially, giving her the bad news in the most painfully awkward and ridiculous way possible. Also gives us one of the best threats I've ever heard anyone tell someone. I think she says that she'll strip him like a human string cheese, or
she says, "I'll take you apart like string cheese."
It's a great line. But I think in that scene, that she knows that this came originally from Logan. That just, it got passed down the line, which is actually even worse to her. And what I wonder about, and again, I don't know how it might manifest, so maybe it wouldn't, because at the end of the day, she's, not just an employee, whatever, but she's dealing with a multi-billionaire, and she want a piece of that, But there could be a certain vindictiveness that happens, because she knows at the end of the day, whose final decision is it really? It's really Logan's. Because his decision would count. And if she is getting knocked out of it, it had to be with his blessing. It can't happen otherwise. And
right. Well, I mean, she knows he picks up the phone and calls the newsroom directly.
Yeah. And the fact that not only is it Logan basically at the end of the day saying, nah, the fact that he would let it happen where it got passed down to a schmuck like Greg in her eyes to be the one to kind of, give her the news, I think in a way makes it even worse. It's like, this is who you send to do your dirty work, the doofus, seriously. So I do wonder if, again, we may never see anything about this again for the rest of the season. We only have whatever number of episodes are left. But I was wondering about that. I was like, oh, that could and I love how Greg kind of takes it like, oh, I actually took care of that. I did it. I did something. Like, really? That was Michael Scott handles firings better than you do, sir. You kid. But, I just wonder if that might at some point could possibly have an ill effect on the Logan Kerry situation. I don't know that it would, but I can't dismiss that it wouldn't. You know what I mean?
I just thought like this episode, she got a lot of airtime.
Oh,
if
absolutely.
She's not going to be if she's not going to be a piece on the board, she sure got a lot of airtime.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's one of the episodes where she's gotten the most airtime because, as opposed to just being someone who sent or delivered messages or is talking on behalf of somebody, there was actually a mini storyline around her specifically. So that is, I'm sure she loved that. I believe I remember looking her up on IMDb once. I think she's a pretty accomplished comic actress. She's done a lot of other things as well. So it gives her a chance to shine, more so than normal in this one. We've kind of like, in a way, we've talked a lot about most of the stuff that really happens at ATN, because a lot of it does tend to revolve around that, and a lot of the Tom Greg, back and forth stuff is about that video or about when Logan initially shows up. The only other thing that really happens of major significance, other than the eventual realization that, hey, the kids might be looking to screw you again, is there's that scene where he gives a speech. He gives, it's like the rally the troops kind of a speech. And I'm watching that scene. I was wondering how far they were going to take it. Is he going to make everyone in the room feel, painful and awkward and weird, like he is when he's originally walking the floor, when he stops behind that one guy and he's pointing out to Tom, I believe, that this guy's been spending all this time just like writing an email. And there's something great about that scene, because I think anyone watching it who's ever worked in an office, especially if you had like not the greatest of managers or bosses, whatever, the type that may occasionally even walk the floor themselves or micromanage, shall we say. And then having like this, one of the probably the most richest and most powerful dudes in the world standing behind you, kind of mocking the fact that you've been spending all this time writing an email. I kept thinking that guy's handling this a lot better than I would. I would have broken into a cold sweat and probably fainted or something like that. But I derailed my own thought. It's the speech. And the first thing I thought when I was watching the speech, when I realized, it is going to be a rallying cry, as he's initially sounding like he's being kind of negative and kind of mocking the idea, we only went up a few percent, whatever. And I couldn't help but think that this, to me, and I don't know if this ever actually happened, but I can so easily imagine that it happened. I can easily imagine that several years ago, Rupert Murdoch, when they were selling off the Fox assets, selling them off to Disney, in fact. But what did he hold on to? Because he sold off the entertainment assets, but he kept the news divisions. He kept Fox News, whatever. And I kept thinking this is the kind of speech that Murdoch would have done. And we all, I mean, I think not we all, but most people know that the Roys are at least, shall we say, loosely based on the Murdoch family. And I kept thinking, oh yeah, I can totally see it. I mean, I believe he would even curse as much. They both have accents from, far from overseas. The whole thing, I could just see it.
It actually is based on a Rupert Murdoch moment, and there was a tweet that I saw that the person on Twitter was Sarah Ellison, who put up that in 2007, Rupert Murdoch stood atop paper boxes and addressed the Wall Street Journal staff.
Oh, wow.
So it actually was inspired by now. He wasn't talking to Fox News, but he was at the Wall Street Journal, and I didn't see what the contents of that speech were or know it, but it was inspired by Rupert Murdoch. So your spidey sense was tingling for a very good reason.
I guess I know obviously Murdoch owned the Post in New York, and I think he might have owned the Wall Street Journal also, now that I think about it. I'm not sure about that, but obviously if he gave a speech there, so clearly he did. I just didn't remember that. But that makes perfect sense, because it would have been a holding that he hadn't sold off, because Murdoch was at the end of the day, he was more interested in news coverage and the power that you can get from that, and how you can really change the conversation, as we've seen, Fox News has done over the last 25 years plus. Okay, so like I said, like I had also mentioned, he does later find out during all that, towards the end of all this, that the kids are aligning with Stewie and Sandy to block the sale, which means I need to bounce back a little bit. Rewind the episode just a teeny bit to the other major plot character push of the episode, which is those rumbling Roy kids. And when I love the pettiness when they realize they have to make their way into the city, and anyone who knows, any major city, but especially one like New York, if you're that far out and you got to get it. I mean, the convenience of being the super rich with a helicopter is nice, but if you're going to have to drive in, that's going to take a little bit of time, But they eventually do make their way in the city. That's why, day becomes night, because it probably takes them that long. But before they can get to what ostensibly is the rehearsal for their often overlooked older brother, who should they run into on the street? It's like magic. But Sandy and Stewie, who are trying to sell them on the idea of voting no. And I kind of adore the act that Shiv puts on. There's almost something almost soap operatic about it, where you're clearly in on this, whatever, but because we know that already. But I like to know, no, maybe it's something that we should talk about. I was just really enjoying the way that she's trying to kind of walk that little tightrope there, and which is what she does a lot during this episode, because she keeps, as far as I can recall right now, she's keeping a lot of her true motivations close to the vest or chest, depending how you like that phrase, and doesn't really let them in on that. So they have that little meeting in the street, and then eventually they get to the place where presumably that rehearsal dinner happened. And does it dawn on anyone, unless I'm forgetting somebody, if this indeed was, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's why it's titled Rehearsal, a rehearsal dinner for Connor's wedding? A rehearsal dinner for his wedding and none of his family was there? I mean, yeah. I'm not wrong about that, because obviously they weren't there, and Logan and wasn't there. His mom is. Wait, do they have the same mother? I can't remember. Do they have the same mother, or do they have a different mother?
I thought he had a different mom.
I think he has a different mother. I can't remember. I apologize to the listeners for that factoid.
Yeah, because you remember when they go see her, the three of them go see her.
Yeah,
Connor's not there.
I believe that is the case. You know what? We'll check after the episode. I'm pretty sure. But in any case, no family there, which is kind of it. I think that, without it being said, and I'll say, let me just say, no. Oh my God, I've become Brian. let me just say, let me just say, well, now I'm Bill Clinton. That does sound like a Clinton kind of thing.
It does.
Let me just say that it's foreshadowing for that great moment at the end with Connor when you realize there's no family here, and what it says later. I'm going to stop talking like that.
But it's so endearing.
My note said it was I'm glad you like it, Brian. It was I refer to it in my notes as subliminal foreshadowing. I was like,
yeah,
okay, we'll go with that. So, and it's an interesting moment when they get to the post rehearsal dinner, especially when they run into Willa on the stairs, who's clearly fleeing the place. And then we hear the story from Connor, how apparently she got up to give a speech, said, I can't do this, disappeared in the bathroom for like 40 minutes with some friends before leaving, which is where they just ran into them. So it's that whole, you got this whole situation of Connor looks like he's just, 2 steps away from the cliffside of doom here. And for a rare moment, even though Roman being the smartass he is, but he can't help that, throughout the whole episode. At least the brothers kind of seem to want to help him. And Shiv is the one who really wants to talk about the option of the no vote, whatever. I get excited because I think you brought it up in a previous week, last week, I guess. The more time we get to spend with them all together, the greater the show is. As even though they're all great in their own individual scenes and moments, the longer we get to see the Roy kids all together, whether they're working together while still ripping at each other or just ripping at each other in general, to me, that's the best stuff that Succession does, quite frankly.
Yeah, and it's funny that both shows that we're talking about tonight, we've made comments that when the main characters all end up in a room together, that we always like those scenes. And in this in particular, seeing them all together, they really set Connor apart in a lot of ways in this episode from the three of them, that he's the least sort of connected to them in many ways, but he wants connection more than any of them. I think he makes a comment at one point, like, I just want everybody at my wedding. Like he just wants them all to be able to be together and not at each other's throats. He kind of wants that business behind them so they can move on. And that they all are in the midst of it. They can't let go of it, except for Roman, who wants to, but feels torn allegiances to both sides.
Right. Well, there's something to be said for, Connor's the oldest one there, and he pretty much distanced himself from the whole situation some time ago. Whether that was part of his own father's thinking as well or not, almost doesn't matter, because it doesn't seem like, unlike the other three, and this is something that Connor will bring up later on, and we'll get there. So, but we're probably going to, we're going to take pieces of Connor's own wisdom and use it and pass it up as our own here, I think. Connor isn't vying for his father's attention and love the way the other three do. And which is interesting because but at times, although he's always been portrayed, or often been portrayed, as the more comic relief of at least the siblings are concerned, because, him and maybe Greg, but as far as those four are concerned. So, because he doesn't have the axe to grind, or he doesn't, or maybe he did and he just decided he got past it. It didn't matter anymore. He's living his life. The fact that he's often mocked by whether it be Roman or even the others and not taken that seriously, he's learned how to shrug that off. But at the end of the day, and even with all this drama that he knows is going on now, where, they're on red alert in the family when, the sides have been drawn more clearly now than ever before, when there's such a deep divide where, like in previous seasons when it was everybody versus Kendall, and stuff like that. And then it became, okay, now people, they've joined forces, whatever. And Connor, in a way, is kind of in the middle of it. He'll he's basically going to just benefit from the sale because he'll get a few $1 billion out of it or something for a business that he's not really involved in or really cares about at this point. But he could sure use the money, even if it's just to prop up his ridiculous political ambition. But I think even the political ambition thing, again, as I said, we look at him as being he's somewhat self-deluded at times, and then he's extremely self-aware other times, as he absolutely is in this episode. But much like the way Logan sees ATN, and to echo my thoughts about how he mirrors Rupert Murdoch, those who give the news can control the news. And if you control the news, you control the conversation, you control the narrative, which is where your power comes from. And I think Connor was trying to do his own thing, as far as like the presidential ambition, whatever. And even admitted it in a previous episode, just to keep that 1%. You're like, yeah, does he actually think he can win a presidency at a certain point? Absolutely not. But as long as you're in that conversation, you have power. And that's the one way he finally has power that moves him away from being just the one that's often mocked. The one who's going to get married to the former hooker, and who lives in some wacky ranch, away from, the big city slickers, like the rest of the family.
Right. And it is kind of heartbreaking to think of the double entendre of in the conversation. Like that Connor just wants to be in the conversation.
Yes.
Because I think in many ways that's how he feels in the family. There's this whole conversation that goes on with the siblings that he's not really, participating in because he's not in it. And in many ways, it seems like he has more wisdom than we probably give him credit for, that he sees their dad as, we've seen him in past seasons, to go to Logan for money. That's how he sees Logan, transactionally, for money, and get together at holidays, see each other. But he doesn't try to move into Logan's world to run in that circle the way the other kids do. And the other kids and Logan have this other conversation going on he's not a part of. And his sort of way to be legitimate outside of that is to get this 1% in the presidential election and think maybe then he's got some gravitas of his own. And it's really kind of sad to apply that to his family and how he sees himself. But, when he finally leaves, what you alluded to, he says later, I think he's realistic and sees things in a way the others maybe don't. And the line that I know we'll talk about Logan drops, I think Connor already had that figured out about.
Right.
Like, I think Connor knows he's not as serious as his dad and other people, but he wants to be somebody that at least is listened to. The question is, are the other three kids capable of that or not? And we don't know. But I think Connor has more wisdom than we've given him credit for.
Perhaps. Well, I'll save more. I'll save more of my commentary on Connor till when we get to that scene, because we're almost there anyway. No, I'll say it now. Here's a phrase I like to use again because I used it earlier. I don't disagree,
but
I think. But what I said about him compared to, let's say, Shiv, or perhaps Roman, and only when he's not at his worst, Kendall. But what is exemplified, especially in this episode, and also his previous interactions with them, is, like I said, having a nice ability to be self-aware. Even the presidential stuff, which, I mean, one can say, okay, he might be blind to the idea that this is ridiculous. But then we kind of know, but I know why, we know why you're doing this. And you know what? There's been a history of people that maybe when you initially heard they were going to run for president, oh my gosh, that's not, or any political office, oh my God, that sounds ridiculous. And then, you fast forward 6 months or a year, hey, it's not so ridiculous. It's not so ridiculous that, that this former football player, who seems like he has brain damage came this close to being the senator from Georgia and really flipping an entire Senate as a result. That close. And others which we are more obvious, but I don't want to go down that road for this podcast. And just to say with him just for one more moment, and again, because sometimes I don't remember things, so you can correct me or someone will correct me, I guess. Even with that whole political campaign, and they talk about how much money everything's going to cost, and even it'll cost them another 100 million just to maintain that 1 percentage point they said in the previous episode. I don't recall him ever, and I could be, you know what? Maybe there is a scene. Does he go to Logan? Does he try to get money from Logan to help support his campaign or not?
I don't remember if it was the campaign or something else. It may have been the campaign, but I know he's asked him for money. And when he talked about the campaign with Logan, I think Logan tried to steer him away, but I think he did ask him for money.
I think you're right. I couldn't be sure because I was going to say something. I realized, wait, I think I'm wrong about that. I don't want to make a declaration that he's never gone to Logan for money. He's like, no, I think he has. I couldn't remember if it was for the political campaign or if it was connected to, oh my gosh, the debut, the Broadway play for Willa, and how much of a black hole that can be money wise. It might have been one or both. I think it was maybe trying to get his dad maybe to be an investor in that or something. That sounds like something he would have done actually. But let me get off Connor a little bit, but just stay with the Roys in general, because at this point in the episode, they go to that bar. By the way, it's a New York, if that's a New York bar, and I didn't actually recognize it, I'm sure it probably is. And it looks really nice. So I thought it was really weird that they would have, that the Roys would have such a snooty perspective that they keep making derisive comments about the place. I was like, dude, it doesn't even look like a dive. I mean, it looks perfectly fun, whatever. Especially when you got Rome there, because Roman's going to be Roman anyway. But I think one of the key moments that we're going to get to here, beyond me saying before I even mention it, by the way, all the stuff in the bar, I'm referring to the bar, not the rehearsal before and not the karaoke place after, but in the bar, my major note that I wrote was, this is the reason we watch Succession. The quick back and forth between them, the affection and loathing that happens all at the same time. The fact that these people they're all at the very least worth millions, whatever. And the fact that they can be, children all over again, wrestling to see what's on a cell phone and arguing about the most ridiculous of points and points of conversation. Whether someone wished somebody a happy birthday, quite frankly. But all the way that all plays out, that's my favorite stuff in the episode. That's my favorite stuff in this series in general and when we go back once again to repeat a point we've made already, when you get them together, this is the fun of it. And we've often talked about a lot of different, big style television series. And I've always talked about how, a common dramatic conceit is let's separate everybody and eventually they come together. Whether it's more in literal terms, like a show like Lost did, where, let's toss everybody on different parts of the island and eventually they'll all come back together. And you notice, hey, people weren't that happy about that, but they did it. Or Game of Thrones is another one like that. Oh my God. And one can list, 30 other shows have done something along those lines. With Succession, the more we get this, the more things get more contained. And I love having Kendall in the mix with them because I love how they're similar, but they're so different at the same time. And it's like very different pieces of music all playing together and you get this beautiful chaotic cacophony between just those three. And then you throw Connor into the mix, who's really kind of like an outlier among them, and having him really get involved made this, I think, a very special episode in that case. So I've said all that. So let me get to the thing that you mentioned before, because I think that's a good turning point in the episode, and it's an intriguing point to talk about. And the interesting thing I was going to mention, it's when Kendall has that private phone conversation with Madsson, or either, the Norwegian or Swede, or whatever the hell it is. It's Skarsgård, and who clearly expresses his concerns that that certain, I think he refers to them as activists on the board. By the way, calling people like those two activists, like, wow, that's really having fun with the meaning of the word activist. That certain activists on the board are going to try to block the sale. And he makes it kind of clear that, this happens, this very well may, whatever, scuttle the whole deal. And because Matt's essentially threatening that he's going to do that. And I love the way he and Kendall's conversation, you're thinking one way, and instead, in that turn that happens, now Kendall wants to block the sale. It's a very interesting flip. And it goes to everything we talked about before about what's really motivating what people are doing. What really is their end game here? What is it they really want here? And how much, and how much are they blinded by just, whatever you want to call it, revenge? You want to call it, just, proving a point. And here's the thing, it's a dead heat between Kendall and Shiv. Which one might have better reason? Because Shiv might think so, but Kendall looked like he was supposed to be the heir apparent from the very first episode of the series. So you had that built in right from the get-go, and then of course the whole thing that happened with the tragic death when they were overseas, and how Logan used that against him, which makes Kendall's turn against his father, a lot more understandable than maybe his siblings realized, because they didn't know. There's been time that's passed since the end of last season, and I'll shut up in a second. I'm still not sure if Kendall's ever told Shiv and Roman. I'm going to guess he didn't for some reason. Why he wouldn't have, or maybe they just figured it out themselves. That's actually possible. I should give them credit for that. Maybe they did figure it out themselves. But he tells him, like, hey, this happened, I'm a bad person, I did whatever. It's like, oh, and Dad clearly was using this against me and made me his pup, whatever. It was almost like a weird. Do they refer to him as a human gaslight or something in this episode at some point?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a little bit of that there too. But I just, this turn here with Kendall, because initially I'm like going, that's exactly what I didn't think. Oh no, wait, that makes perfect sense. I think it's I think it's the most important kind of flip in the episode.
Well, when he talks to Madsson, and Madsson basically gives him the inside info that Logan then discloses in the meeting with all of them. Like, yep. Kendall now actually knows Madsson very well may walk and the deal may die. Madsson doesn't pull any punches. And basically says, like, hey, a lot of guys talk shit, but I'm not really talking shit. Like, I'm the kind of guy that if this doesn't go through, I'm probably done, and that's it. And at that point, if they want the money, they want to do all this and be free, your thought is that he's going to definitely be like, Shiv, we're not screwing up the deal. So the flip, in my mind, the way that we're talking about it is, okay, if Madsson walks, it screws us, but it really screws Dad too. And so now I have a piece of information that no one else has, and I can lobby for this and sort of hide in the crowd of people that want to do this and accomplish my goal without being the one responsible for killing the deal.
Right. I think when this happens, for me, it kind of crystallizes a lot of stuff with Kendall, and I think Shiv shares this with him as well. The only difference between them right now is Shiv has also got the situation with Tom, and so that's an addition. That's obviously a major factor, which is impacting her as well, because she's also trying to hold on to what should be hers because of what can happen with a divorce with Tom if he starts, because clearly he's going after something if he's going to complicate matters by, conflicting out contacting every possible lawyer in New York City that she could conceivably go to. You don't do that if you want, like I said before, you don't do that if you just want to be like, we can just go our separate ways. You're after more than that. But the fact is, it seems in this moment, that aside, they are more motivated to screw over their dad than anything else. And that, as I think we've said in more words than necessary probably, that is what separates them from Roman. That's the motivation those two share. Roman does not have that, which feeds into why we see Roman showing up at the end of the episode and all that stuff. As I believe we've pretty much thought or suspected from the get-go, because during all their interactions before, he's the one who kind of like, okay, but he doesn't want this to continue to be a thing versus dad. If we're going to do something together, let's just do something together. It's interesting. The biggest smartass who rarely can say a serious word that isn't, snarky or nasty, in some ways is also has the most plaintive way of wanting to proceed. That, okay, I just want to do the 100 thing, or I just want, okay, we're going to do a piercing. Okay, let's just remake this thing and make it our own. Again, wanting to distance himself from their father, because he's not out to get his dad. He's disappointed of how he got treated. And he understands what the perception is of him. But I think he still cares about impressing him. If he can do this, I'm also going to impress my dad. I'll show him that I can be, I'm not defective. There isn't something wrong with me. I can be something. I can be you, but a better you, So I think that's all at play here as well.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So, this scene, again, I already referenced it in my silly intro, so but I can't not at least make a mention of it, other than the Jaws line. My favorite thing in the entire episode, as far as just funny dialogue wise, is when Roman does this entire analogy relating them to the Beatles. Which I kept thinking, hey, I wonder if Roman watched the Disney Plus, Peter Jackson documentary, that he would actually be kind of aware of all this stuff, whatever. But again, love this whole scene, the distrust, but they're still trying to unite, about the text, the shifting of allegiances, whatever. And then as we get towards the end of the bar scene, we get, I would call, a great, funny, yet, oh my God, sad line from Connor, which also dictates where they're going to end up. And the line is, and based on, as you know, Brian, my own proclivities occasionally in this area, I would like to sing one fucking song in karaoke because I've seen it in the movies and nobody ever wants to go. And it's like, it's so sad.
It is. It's really sad that he just wants to go do what normal people do, go to a normal people bar and go to a normal karaoke thing and drags them kicking and screaming. But the thing that's funny is, and while I love it and you love it, most normal people don't pick Leonard Cohen to sing karaoke. But in New York that may be true. But I thought that was a really, really, I was so curious what he was going to pick.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's a joke earlier about him picking the song by the Eagles.
Oh, yeah.
And then it ends up being Leonard Cohen. Yeah.
Well, the thing with the Leonard Cohen song, I'll tell you something. I've done my share of karaoke in New York, no less. And not just in local bars here in Brooklyn. I've done it in several places throughout Manhattan, Koreatown, which is where the most well-known places to do karaoke in New York City tend to be, etc. I've never seen anyone sing Leonard Cohen in karaoke unless you're including Hallelujah, which is originally a Leonard Cohen song, even though, generally speaking, if you're singing Hallelujah in karaoke, you're doing the Jeff Buckley version. You're not doing the Leonard Cohen version, which is sung in a very different way. And Buckley kind of made it more his own before his own passing because it's kind of iconic. But I've never heard any. Again, when I'm in the city, I tend to do like kind of like what the Roys do here. They tend to they got a private room. They're not like in a karaoke bar where there's everyone around them. Most places they have that area, but then people get private rooms, and we kind of if I'm going to go through trouble going into Manhattan to do karaoke, then I want a private room. If I'm just going to a local bar, then it's fine. I don't mind singing in front of everybody. Wow the crowd. Love that. Of course, we also find out when they get to this place at some point that Connor has actually contacted Logan and let them know where they are. And they're going to realize that Logan actually is going to want to meet them downstairs initially, whatever. I wrote a line down. And I'm feeling stupid now. Is Roman referring to Connor or Kendall? Refresh my memory. I'm a horrible podcaster. When he says, "Do I get to be a Buddhist if I kill a fucking Buddhist?"
Oh, he's referring to Kendall. And there's
Kendall,
a line earlier where Kendall's talking about being Buddhist, and Roman says, "Nice fucking Tom Ford's Buddha."
Yeah, that's it. Okay, thank you.
That's earlier, but then he hits him again about it here. It's Kendall he's talking about.
I thought it was Kendall, but I couldn't remember what instigated it. This is what happens when I watch these shows post midnight and I'm trying to stay up and take notes, whatever. Okay, Logan eventually shows up. We get the scene of Logan and the kids and Carrie, who does not leave. They want her out, but Logan doesn't, which in a way I think maybe helps him with the situation with her where she could be angry about the whole video thing, but having her stay there says something that actually might squash as far as it being an issue for her. It's like, I still want you to be a major player here. I just don't know if I want you to do that. So the scene between them, and we've seen variations on something like this in the series before, where Logan's in the position of he's sort of kind of apologizing, but is he, what is it he's really sorry for or not? Whatever. And you've got the disbelieving Shiv is really taking the fight to him. And also because she's the one he's currently personally screwing with because of the Tom situation. So that makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense because you're really screwing with me more than these two, whatever. So she's not going to believe a damn word they're saying. But we get this great parrying back and forth, which eventually gets to the thing with Logan. And it's much like the scene he had with his security chief in the first episode and other moments throughout the series. I love when he uses very plain speaking words that have much more meaning and resonance than you'd think. He's able to say more by saying something which you might not even quite get what he means. You referenced it already. When, he basically tells them, you are not serious people. And that's, speaking as a writer, blah, blah, I marveled at that line because I kept thinking that line says so much with words that I or many probably would not have chosen. And I was like, I know Better Call Saul is still going to be up for some, but it's going to be hard to beat Succession's final season, dudes. Let's all get ready that Better Call Saul might not be taking anything. Because when I see writing like this, I'm just like, oh my God, it's so good. And it's so powerful. And I feel there's a certain, I talked about the birthday party last week and how, we can see Logan being angry and this and dismissive and really nasty. But at the end of the day, he's sad. And at the end of all this, when he puts in his mind, at least, the effort. And it still comes down to when he says that. And yes, there's a bit of a bite to what he says at the end here. But he's sad. It's disappointing him that he has to, at the end of the day, this is what he has to say. And that this is not going to ever be, at least foreseeably resolved. Because he does love them. It's a screwed up love, but it's love. He wouldn't have any of the issues with these guys, dealing with them, if that wasn't there. he would probably squash them like a bug, a lot more effectively and quickly. And I think that does hamper his actions to a certain extent. It's such it's like this sequence, we get this great moment here and then the one that's going to come up after it. But that, just staying with this for the moment, that was just like, oh, Jesus, man. And it's like, but it's interesting because I don't think the viewer is really, we've not been trained to root for Logan at all in this series. I don't think so. He's he's more villainous than anything else.
No, but they flipped the script on him.
Yes.
And that. I mean, have we ever seen him go to someone else and sort of have some humility?
Right.
And for him, he just flat out says, like, I don't do apologies. I'm not good at it, whatever. But he goes to them. They won't come out to the car. He goes inside. He sits down. I think it's funny that Kendall chooses to sit on the back of the chair so he can stay above Logan.
Yes, I noticed that.
The entire time. I bet filming that, like, he probably regretted that at some point in the middle of the day, like sitting up there for all the different shots. But there are a couple of times in this that you see what Logan has that none of the kids have. When he's on the boxes at giving the speech, when he's talking to them here and saying, like, look, like, you don't understand, you're right, like, the numbers are there. I understand why you would think this is smart. He acknowledges them, but says, like, you don't understand, deals like this go away. If you don't take them, they go away. And he's made the read, and he's read this guy, and he knows it. But they can't get past the emotion of it. And the thing with him is that, yes, he might get emotional and he might get mad, but he'll go do deals with people he hates if the deal's right. And if he gets a good price, if he can make the deal, he does it even if he hates them. They're at the point where they can't make a deal with him because they're mad, and that's not a part of who he is.
Right.
At the end of the day, he would make a deal if it was the right deal. And saying they're not serious people is, I mean, what more could Logan Roy say to someone?
Right. The one last thing about Logan, which I just thought of, I feel like I left out of all that. The thing with a moment or a scene like this, and maybe slightly during the first episode of the season, but more here, the one thing that Logan doesn't like to have to do or ever have himself thought of that way or seen that way, but he's almost giving this slight opening the door a crack and letting us see this about him, is being vulnerable. And the only time he's been vulnerable on this series is due to his health issues that he's had, which was a theme from the get-go, because of his possibly failing health and the issues that he has, and he ends up in the hospital, he ends up with this, or maybe he might have a certain form of dementia or whatever, which, by the way, we haven't heard about that in a while, have we? So it's a great it's a great major scene. Oh, and by the way, the thing with, that you amazingly pointed out, even jokingly, about how Kendall is sitting up, and so he has this position above. It's a fascinating thing to watch in this series. I'm not saying one has the time to go rewind and watch the first 3 seasons again. No, that's crazy. Although, well, why not? Probably should have done it before I came back. Key scenes, major scenes involving multiple players, usually the Roy family, throughout the seasons, they take very special care with how they place the people in the scene. It's not just simply about people sitting across from each other or whatever. There will be things relating to the height of where they appear on screen, whether they're lower or higher. The most obvious one, and I talked about it during the best of whatever year it was, I forget at this point, during the finale, the season 3 finale, the triangle of Kendall, Roman, and Shiv, and how that's choreographed and how that's blocked, and how Kendall is very much in the foreground of the scene, but he's also diminished and he's lowered. He's lower than all of them. It's done very deliberately, and it's like this there's a photographic term for it, I can't think of it right now, but they maintain that kind of triangle. He's always on the bottom of it, and then even when Roman kind of sits alongside him, it's when it's starting to even out a little bit, but it's still quite not there. But when they do the scene in the karaoke, I remember having the same thought, and I also had the thought that even when I love that it's not four of them. You've got Carrie in there, which kind of changes the shape, and you've got Connor there, which leads us to what I think is the whoa moment of the episode. It's what Connor has to say after all this is said and done. And we've talked a lot about Connor and the way he perceives himself and the way he perceives his family. We basically did our own foreshadowing for this scene, quite frankly. But it's what you were saying, Brian, about the wisdom that he has, and what I was saying about the self-awareness that he has. And the actor's name is escaping me at the moment. God, I know the actor's name. I just forgot it. I never write things down in front of me. He's been in so many things over the years, like Speed and a bunch of TV shows. Whatever. It might be his best moment on the whole series. Definitely as far as power and emotion. I know you're looking at, thank you. And the way he talks about how he got used to the idea of where he stood in this family and how he was seen quite some time ago. And he's fine with that. He learned, and the way he talks about things about not being loved, and maybe he'll never be loved. Whether it be in his family, whether it be in his current relationship, because he is kind of freaking out because Willa has kind of disappeared and he's kind of trying to track her on his phone and she's kind of in and out, whatever. And at this point, he might not even have someone to marry, whatever. But everything he says here, and he really sticks a fork in all of them, and there's no denying it. And he sees and says things about them that none of them have ever said about each other, including Logan, quite frankly, about how they're all, and I didn't write any of this down, so I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head, but I believe he refers to them as, they're like sponges, desperate to soak in any form of love, whatever. And it's almost comical when he calls himself like an insect who lives on a rock and, or whatever he calls himself, whatever. But he's kind of weirdly, it's a weird analogy, but he's kind of right.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. The actor is Alan Ruck.
There you go, Alan Ruck. Thank you.
But the idea, the thing that he points out that hits to the heart of all of them is he points out that he knows what his imperfections are, and has an amazing self-awareness of what his imperfections are, but he calls all of them out as insecure and needy, and that's what's fueling all of this. And he doesn't need it, which is why he can walk away and why he can live away from the city, why he's not in all of the intrigue, because it's just all this dysfunctional soup that he sees them all stewing about in. And the way he delivers it is just as effective as Logan Roy saying, "You're not serious people."
Yes. It's by the time Connor is done and he leaves, it's in a way, it's a 1-2 punch to the Roy kids. Dad has them staggering. Connor put them on the mat, so to speak. I just watched Creed for the first time the other day. I can't help it. Sorry. Got 2 more to go now, right? Anyway, I'll watch them next year. So, and it's interesting, as we leave that scene, and how the episode and how the next minute or two goes, because we do pick up with him, and he returns. I guess I'm assuming he's staying in a hotel. I'm guessing, and Willa is actually there, which runs contrary to what he thought. Although it was interesting how he had become kind of resigned to the fact, if she's there, we get, if she loves me, she doesn't love me, whatever. It's, it's an interesting kind of dynamic. The more you think about it, it's like, does she? Do they? I don't know. We don't spend enough time with them. We have our perceptions the way everyone else does, which is usually Roman screwing with them, quite frankly, and making the jokes that he does. But at the end of the day, like, in a weird way, maybe they are right for each other, you know?
It's a weird thought to think of all the characters. The only one that went home that night and someone was glad to see him and welcome him to bed was him.
Right. However, it's interesting. We've also watched Kendall and Shiv both being driven away. Kendall's kind of chuckling, you know. He looks like he's kind of like, whatever. I think he's so. In some ways, he's so far gone that, and I think in a weird way, he's kind of in a position where no matter how things go, I think he can end up in a decent place. Because, you know, one way or the other. Because as far as he knows, you know, if the sale does happen, then boom, okay, then I'll get the PGN and then I'll just go up against that. Oh, and if it fails, okay, boom, I'll go whatever. He's fine either way. Shiv, on the other hand, she's just totally in like pensive mode because that 1-2 punch probably left her shaken. And then, you know, and she still has all the unresolved issues and the upcoming drama that's going to be going on with Tom as well, on top of everything else. So, in a way, I think she's the most unsettled of the three. And then you have Roman, who shows up to see Logan. Now, did you have a reaction when he shows up? Was it a reaction of, oh, okay, that makes sense? Or was there at least a little bit of a, or, you know?
I was more intrigued than disappointed because I think there are a couple of things he says throughout the episode.
Mm-hmm.
He says earlier, he's like, maybe we're tired. I think when Sandy and Stewie shows up, he's like, maybe we're tired and we don't want to quit cornholing Dad. Like he's also getting tired of the back and forth. And I don't just see him going to their dad as betrayal. It will be seen by them as betrayal.
Right.
But I don't think in his mind he's trying to betray anybody. I think he's trying to stay in touch with all of them. And what you were talking about the kids, I think Shiv's emotions are still the rawest. Kendall's emotions have some distance from the things that have happened. And I think he's almost enjoying just seeing what happens and the intrigue of it all. But I love how the only thing I will say about it is it happened so fast. It was jarring almost that I did not expect it that quick.
Right.
But when it happened, it didn't bother me.
Right. I actually agree. It didn't bother me either. I wasn't disappointed in them because, as you say, they pretty much have been indicating that Roman still isn't as anti-dad as the other two for the reasons that we've already talked about, so we don't really need to get there. It's interesting how Kendall is the one who will bring up the fact that, you know, Logan hit Roman on at least one occasion. There was more of a perceived abusive relationship between those two than he had with his other kids. And maybe in a weird way that also feeds into Roman being kind of, you know, having that slightly abused child syndrome, perhaps. Shiv is, as you said, Shiv is the most raw because this is all now. She felt she just got betrayed now. The Tom situation is happening now, and her dad is helping him now. She is going to be the most out for blood. Kendall, this has been going on for the last few years of this show. Like we said, this has been the situation since early season 1 when he, you know, didn't get the chair that he thought he was going to get and everything we've already talked about. But I think Kendall has had such turns between his addiction issues, between some of the insane things he might be able to look back upon now and realize some of the stuff he did. Like that one episode. Wait, was it his birthday party? that episode?
Oh my God, that was bonkers.
It's one of the most insane. Like, let's contrast that birthday party to Logan's birthday party.
Yeah.
Oh my God. What is, you know, basically, you know, Kendall's birthday party was like an escape room on Quaaludes or something. But now he's reached a place where he's not taking as many steps back as someone like a Connor, but he's able to take a step back and kind of weirdly enjoy this. There's a certain malevolence about him, whereas I think Shiv is still operating from the most pain here.
Yes.
But yeah, but Roman, they kind of had hinted at this already, the way he's been talking about everything from the very first episode that we saw, and even in this episode, when they dropped the stuff about the text and the birthday, and they look, oh, there was actually 2 texts. And I'm like, that's a great joke gag in this moment, but it's also a very sly little, again, it's like foreshadowing for what's going to happen later, much like the stuff we said about Connor earlier. And the fact that he does show up there. Oh, and there's no Kerry there. It's just the other. I think the security dude was there, and he leaves the room, so just leaves it. He gets to have a private conversation. No witness, no one else there, and it's like, oh, we're gonna get the band back together to go see Mattson again, like you did before, because Logan is also being maybe obviously sly here. Because clearly having Roman in the room at Mattson is someone that can more easily relate to someone like a Mattson because of the age disparity and the way they see the future and tech and everything else. Those two kind of can really, vibe with each other more than Logan could possibly do at Mattson. So there obviously a lot of this for Logan is being very pragmatic about it. And once again, offering him, dangling something in front of him. And in this case, I think it's if I'm remembering correctly, it's ATN.
Yeah. Yeah, and he invokes the Night of the Long Knives. It says that the Night of the Long Knives is coming, which I won't bore you, and we're running a little long, so I won't give you the full history lesson. But basically, it's when Hitler carried out a series of executions to ensure the brown shirts that another faction within the Nazi Party was not gaining favor. So basically, Logan's telling Roman that he's about to get rid of a bunch of people that aren't loyal to him,
right?
Or whose loyalty he doubts, and he wants Roman close. So,
no, it makes perfect sense. And the only thing I'll end my thinking on the episode with this is when we see Roman with Logan and their conversation they have here, and then we can kind of do a little movie playback in our mind of multiple scenes between Logan and Roman over the course of the 4 seasons, I guess. Roman is more the epitome of what Connor said than either Kendall or Shiv. Although they both have that quality about them as well, clearly. The difference between them and Roman at the end of the day is the two of them have both built these walls of resentment and anger around that black hole of desperation that they might have. And those walls are fortified by either the perceived rejection or their desired revenge at this point. Roman doesn't have that, and that's why Roman is the one that Logan can still get to and use, and perhaps he also, maybe we have to admit, maybe he does legitimately at least care about him up to a point. And he does love him, at least he'll have one of them back. So it was a great episode. Really, 2 super duper strong episodes to start a final season. And, and this is a show that usually ends really well. So it's very encouraging. It's very encouraging.
I was not expecting to see Logan and the kids in the same room this episode, and was really glad I did. So it was a great episode.
Absolutely. So with all that said and such, okay, Greg, let us now move on to that other HBO show, which we'll probably spend a little less time talking about, but it doesn't mean it wasn't an excellent episode as well. And we're talking about Perry Mason. And now we're up to chapter 13. I'm so happy they don't give me titles to have to try to remember. So this episode, it opens with a flashback, which is kind of sort of interesting because it's the first of technically 2 flashbacks we're going to get in this episode regarding the Gallardo family. Although this one I think takes place a little later than the one we're going to see later in the episode. They do contrast from each other fairly drastically. The one that we open with is fairly bittersweet, but it's a happy memory. Whereas the one that we're going to see later, that one's straight up tragic and even horrific. Both revolve around the site of the about to be built McCutcheon Stadium, which I think, if you correct me if I'm wrong, at this point, that stadium has actually been built at this point. We just haven't seen it on the show. Is that correct?
Correct.
They have built it. I was pretty sure about that, because how else do you start doing the selling on the baseball team if you don't have the stadium in place already? Okay, so that just tells you, considering, by the way, like no one knows this, you don't build a stadium in a week or two. It takes a little bit of time. So obviously, X number of years have passed over the course of the show when they're doing this. On to the current timeline, because I don't know if I really want to. I mean, if you want to talk a little bit about the opening, you can, but I'm like, let's just start. Let's move on.
No, the only thing I'll say is I don't remember seeing the big credits at the beginning of this one.
The big credits happen when they get out of the first flashback, and we see the older brother in his prison cell. And we're looking through like the mesh, the gate, or not the gate,
the bars,
the bar. Well, they're not. Well, it looks almost like a chain link mesh.
Yeah,
above him, and the letters are kind of entangled in that. So you can make some sort of metaphor for that if you like. I don't know.
Interesting. I must have looked away in that moment and not saw that. So
yeah, it's the first. It's one of the only ones I think of the season so far where it is not like a person either, somehow in front of or around some of the letters, whatever. But on to the current timeline, and it's the morning when the trial is about to kick off, and both Della and Perry have clearly spent the previous evening in the arms of, their new relationships. Except Della, she wants to get cracking on the case, because it's, morning of the trial. She's trying constantly to call Perry. Perry, on the other hand, would like nothing better than to run off to Yosemite with our Miss Jenny and ride the horses into the sunset. He is truly not just a reluctant hero. He is the reluctant defense attorney, at least at this point in the episode.
Yeah, he's reluctant, but he starts to get flashes of inspiration and has a great moment that we'll get to later in the trial.
I'll get there. We do first get to, if we're going to do a trial, as our resident lawyer and everyone who's ever seen any law show in their life knows, you got to start with the opening statements. I like that they intercut the opening statements that we're also watching and hearing the Frank Finnerty radio commentary, the fellow who has the articulate and not that slow delivery of a Walter Winchell combined with the skewed bluster of an oldie-timey Rush Limbaugh type. And when we get a load of those two opening statements, they go pretty much the way you'd expect they would. Milligan is painting a picture of the Gallardos as these, evil animals who, unlike fellow law-abiding citizens who have gone through all these hard times but continue to walk the straight and narrow, they resorted to murder of one of the city's most beloved citizens just for a few dollars and a gold coin. Whereas Perry starts to just slightly peel back who McCutcheon might actually be, hinting where by the time we get to a point might be a lot of people might have wanted to kill this guy.
Yeah, it's I thought using the radio voiceover was a creative way to play back and forth between them. I liked that device quite a bit.
Oh yeah, I enjoyed it tremendously. So we do then cut away from the trial, cut away from the proceedings, as I like to say, and we catch up with our man, Paul Drake, who is attending, I guess it's like a ribbon cutting ceremony, because there's always tons of ribbon cutting ceremonies. Oh, by the way, it could have been an opportunity for it to be a ribbon cutting ceremony for like a supermarket, and they could have brought back in Sean Astin's character, because apparently IMDb lied when they told me that he was going to be in every episode, because he was not in the last couple episodes. Liars, IMDb. They do bad lists, and they lie. Anyway, he's trying to grab a few words with the somewhat standoffish Councilman Taylor, inquiring about that sister Noreen, the catatonic gal who's back in the nut house and whatever. And we get I don't know if, we don't get actual factual information, I don't believe. I think I think Taylor tries to be initially dismissive, saying, a car accident, private family matter. But he's immediately kind of getting not just defensive, just being as threatening as a councilman could possibly be. And especially when when he hits a line like that, he doesn't like investigators, especially shadowy ones. And you realize, speaking about words that have double meanings, he clearly is hitting that as a double meaning in this moment.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And, the information Paul gets, you wonder if it's true or not, if it was a car accident. Mm-hmm. But because he says, well, it was a car accident and, and my family's leaving it at that. We're starting to peel back the layers of what's going on and how all these people interconnect.
Right, right. I am 99 point whatever percent sure that what we discussed a few weeks ago, and I think you beat me to it. Smarty pants over there, lawyer. It's gonna be involving a belt. I think I saw something. I was like, oh yeah, it's gonna be about the belt. It's gonna be about that. That makes sense. Cause anyway, but
Chekhov's belt.
yeah, but we'll get there. But right now we got to get back to the trial, and now we're up to the first of the witnesses, and it's this bus driver, Brian Walsh, and basically the bus driver is brought on to establish where the Gallardos were at a certain point in time, which would have been coincided with when the murder happened. Now, obviously, you can, and again, it being the 1930s, you can more clearly get away with speaking a certain way that you might not be able to 70, 80 years later in court. Because clearly the bus driver, whenever he sees these two get on, he's doing the, his own, the 30s version of racial profiling. He's keeping an eye on them, not knowing, you never know what they might get up to there. But I really liked Perry kind of taking him to task because he makes it clear, like, when they got on, got off, but you don't know where they went. But then there's that little stab the driver actually gets on him about, you wouldn't make those assumptions. And he makes that comment about what if, unless they're shifty like you, Mr. Maggot. So
right.
Echoing the way he's been talked about in the press, the newspapers, probably the radio program as well. Although I feel like that radio dude might be a bit more, might come up with more colorful language than that. I'm not sure.
For sure.
So it becomes one of those moments where it's kind of like a Perry wins and Perry loses in the same moment because, yeah, he does make the point that the driver doesn't really establish anything that really is concrete as far as a murder is concerned. He also gets undercut himself in the way he's perceived in that courtroom and the laughter that ensues and whatever, which is not the best thing to happen at that moment.
It's not. And I think the footnote I'd put there is before he questions the witness, Della says the jury likes him. Be careful. Like she watched the jury liked that witness.
Yes. Right.
And Perry had what he needed from the witness to say he didn't know where they went, but he kept going and gave the guy the chance to jab him back.
Right. Absolutely. He at this point, he pushes a little too far, and that's what happens. And perhaps we can say he learns from that in his later, much far greater moment in court. But what happens here, obviously, and that ensuing laughter I reference and so on, that gets the Gallardo family worried, Mom and Sophia, which leads them to reveal the thing about the money that was left for them that they found, underneath the car and everything. That I guess one of the brothers, when he drew the picture of the car to lead them to it, blah 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 blah, whatever, to get to the money. And that's where they start to put together the idea that this was actually maybe a murder for hire situation, that they were being paid for this and the money was $2,000. Hey, I would love $2,000 right now, my friend. But in 1933, $2,000 is a serious piece of change. Go Google how much that's worth. I'm not about to, but trust me, it would be like getting definitely five figures, I would say.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So with all this new information, that's when Perry realized, okay, they're going to need more time, whether it be for more investigating. You got to try to connect a few more dots and how you're going to build a case. He is desperate to request a recess. But Hamilton Berger requests it before Perry can even open his mouth. Also reminded me, wait, Berger's at the table with, what's his face? Is he playing second chair there? I didn't realize he was going to be there. But it is Berger who does it, right? It's not Milligan who does it. Yeah, it has to be. And why? Why does this happen? Well, we find out when we go back to Berger's office. He is now prepared to offer them a deal. The deal is life with no parole, but it's still a deal considering, and he has all these reasons, which all sound very, reasonable and plausible. And yet at the end of the day, why are you doing this is what Perry is wondering. And you can kind of clearly see Milligan's not into it, the way he's kind of standing. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's a moment where Perry even brings him up, and I think Hamilton, or Ham, if we want to call him that, as his pals do. I think Ham is, correct me if I'm wrong, is he even slightly dismissive of Milligan, or what his feelings on the matter don't matter here?
Yeah, he's talking as if he had not consulted with Milligan at all about this.
Right. Well, he is the guy in charge at the end of the day. He is his boss at the end of the day. Even though this will make Milligan's career, and he wins this case, he can probably raise his profile and probably go after Berger's chair, quite frankly, because Berger himself has probably loftier aspirations as well, as I think they've talked about in previous episodes between him and Della. So this all leads Perry to go see the Gallardos in prison.
But can I?
Okay, so you can say that. I'm sorry.
I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
Do you think Ham did that because of McCutcheon or because of Taylor?
Is it possible Taylor has reached out to him in between those things? That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Because Della says who got to him, he wouldn't look me in the eye. And she is, she's an authority on his behaviors. And she knew in that room he was off. And you can trust her more than Perry, because she knows the man. And it makes me think it's Taylor, because we see the private investigator following Perry and Della in this episode and gathering information that I think McCutcheon is gathering. I think it's Taylor that reached out to Berger and said, make this go away.
Interesting. Just to be contrary, as some former podcast co-hosts used to be, because I don't got a dog in this hunt, or whatever that phrase is. That's not the phrase. Race? Dog in the race? Dog in the whatever.
Dog in this fight.
Dog in this fight. Wow. Someone's going to make fun of me for that one. I'm going to go the other direction. Regardless of whether that McCutcheon might have men following Perry and Della and whatever, which he very well which I think he would be doing regardless, because he's clearly someone from the get-go we've seen is keeping tabs and is fully aware of what Mason, who he was, who he is, and what he's doing. I think he just wields more power than a councilman does. Keep in mind, this councilman, as if I'm recalling, they were saying he's the brother of the woman there. So he's kind of, if the woman if Noreen is a victim, he is a brother of the victim. We're going on the assumption that the person who put her there in one way or another, and we're going on the that Belt was involved, was McCutcheon. He's more invested in making this all go away. Taylor is, because maybe by going along with this, that's helped fortify his political position. Maybe there was kind of a quid pro quo, and that's kind of helped him get to where he is. He's a councilman. Let's not give him, all the, he's not a congressman. Let's put it that way. But still, it's still the beginning. So I just feel who's going to have an influence on the DA of Los Angeles. I'm going to go with the oil baron more than the councilman. Now, could it still be what you said? Of course it could be. It's still, maybe if they have a political affiliation with each other and you want whatever, and maybe there's a lot more strands to be unraveled that we don't know about yet. Of course. At this point, I'm going to go with that one. And maybe it's because of the knowledge that because here's what I would say. I would say it's more, in my mind, it would be more likely that Taylor would say something to McCutcheon about this, that, okay, now they know that my connection, and they're coming to me. They're sending their PI, and he probably said something much more derisive than that, which I won't say, to speak to me. He might say that you need to know about this. You need to make this go away, because it's not going to be good for either one of us. And that would lead McCutcheon to be the one who goes to Hamilton and says, if it means just we need to make this case go away, even if it means they don't get the death penalty after all. That is just my guess. Again, I could be totally wrong, but it's a really interesting idea either way. Especially because I think, at least I do. I can only speak for myself. I really am enjoying the Hamilton Burger character because he's set up as if nothing else, he's almost like the likable antagonist. It's like, because
Yeah.
he is, but he isn't, because he clearly has respect and he clearly, is buddies with Della to no end, because they both help each other out in the ways we already know. But I think there's a weird sort of respect between him and Perry. And there's that thing he says later, which is right where I was getting to. But I'll just skip to it right now. When the deal is turned down, and Milligan is obviously pleased with that because he didn't want them to offer a deal anyway. But Ham is talking Perry up about how he's, the speed with which he was able to deal with passing the bar and all that stuff. And finally saying he's a lot craftier than you think. And I loved hearing that, because it's like, okay, I'm hoping that means at some point, maybe in this very episode, and it turned out to be this very episode, we're going to get a good old fashioned Perry Mason kind of moment where he's going to win a major point in this trial, whatever. It's too early in the episode to make someone admit they killed somebody on the stand, and apparently he's still, somehow the Gallardo still ended up doing it. I'm still confused by that. But, I'm sorry. It's such an interesting idea. It's like, wait, but they did it. Okay. But someone like Hamilton being gotten to, but it's a way in which he got to, but it's not something which he can't really change it beyond this. He can offer them the deal. They turn it down. There's not much else he can do at this point.
Right.
So
he's a benign actor of the powers that be.
Right. So the thing where I was going to go before was after Perry finds out about the money and the potential murder for hire. That's what leads him to go back to see the Gallardos, and that's what eventually gets us to what I call the second flashback, where we see where they used to live, and we realize this is at least some time before what we saw in the very beginning of the episode. But literally, police are trashing their farm, breaking down the doors, burning down the property to make way to build that stadium. And in the midst of it all, their little sister dies in the fire, which is, I don't know if we knew about that before. I don't think we did, because I was kind of like, wow, that's, even though we didn't, see it, okay, they killed a kid. And I realized, wait, what's with Perry Mason? Is every season they're going to be killing kids? It was like, what is this, Walking Dead? Is Walter White writing the scripts here? Like, hey, you got to kill some more kids here. That's what all these prestige shows we watch, and they all kill kids. They didn't kill any kids on Mad Men, goddammit. Anyway, wait, did they? No, I don't think so. Anyway, no, they just gave him away instead. So anyway, let's get to Drake, Paul Drake, that is, and when he finds out that someone was involved in this murder for hire, and someone by the name of Ozzie Jackson, who then he realizes probably more of a middleman. And one thing I love the idea. The one thing he's known for, how to spot him anywhere, is that he tends to wear Converse sneakers. I was like, okay, Converse sneakers. I don't think they probably weren't. It's probably too early for them to be Chuck Taylors, but I love the fact that they're.
Oh no, my friend.
Oh, what year was Chuck Taylor?
I did a deep dive.
Oh, look at you!
And in 1916, Converse introduced its basketball shoes, and in 1917, Chuck Taylor's debuted.
Oh my God, I did not. So Chuck. Wait, okay, I gotta ask. Okay, I'm totally derailing that. Okay, I need to know now. I need to know. So Chuck Taylor. I assumed that Chuck Taylor was actually the name of an athlete that they named the sneaker after, or am I just so, maybe I shouldn't, because, Air Jordans didn't happen till the mid 80s, as this upcoming movie is going to tell us all about. I don't know if someone 70 years earlier said, oh no, we can name a sneaker after a current athlete, but I never looked up, wait, who is Chuck Taylor? Or was he just a designer?
Chuck Taylor was a person he was an American basketball player, and later became a basketball shoe salesman, and he asked specifically Converse to design a better basketball shoe than the one they initially created, and that's how we got Chuck Taylors.
See, this should be the proudest moment of this podcast. So that anyone listening, because you know what, I didn't really care much for their TV talk. They ramble, they talk too much. But you know what? I learned about Chuck Taylors, and I never knew that. And I had a pair when I was a kid. Next week, we're going to be talking about Doc Martens. Anyway, so later on, when Drake, with that little bit of information, Drake is talking to his brother-in-law, Mo, who knows who Ozzie Jackson is. After a little repartee between them, which is there's a little bit of tension there, and Drake makes it clear, it's like, hey, we're going to move out soon when things, and the brother kind of backpedals just a little bit, but you do get the feeling there is a little bit of tension of everyone being under the same roof at this point. But he gives him the information that this Ozzie Jackson character, he's actually part of the Perkins crew. We bring it back to the Perkins thing. I love it when the storylines start to connect together. And then we have Drake actually meeting with Perkins later on, and he uses those photos, because he still has them, as part of this, let's call it like a fair trade deal with Perkins. Perkins helps him, connect with and find Jackson. He'll help him find whoever this was who was taking these pictures. This Mr. Snaps. And I'm like going, that's a dangerous game you're playing, man.
It is. It's a gutsy game, and I was curious how Paul was going to work his way out of it. But eventually he does, but he pays a heavy price.
Oh man, does he ever. So I do love it. Okay. It's a hard thing to write, because you always are going to feel like, this feels really, contrived. That's the word I always, whenever you have to have a moment where a character has, either it's a mild epiphany, or they suddenly realize something, they suddenly see something, and we've seen it a billion times where it's someone just looking at something just a little bit more closely or whatever. And they kind of play into that a little bit here with the fingerprint that Perry sees. And I love the idea of him looking. I mean, it's a little bit this is more a bit not subtle, but literally looking through the bottom of a drinking glass, something that looks approximates a shot glass, quite frankly, or something like, definitely a glass for boozing. But he sees something about that photo which catches his eye. And then which leads to the courtroom scene about the fingerprint. And we've got, the prosecution has the at that time, as close as you could get to a fingerprint expert,
right?
Because we are getting to an era of time of when did fingerprints start to become a thing, and the analysis, we're kind of getting there. I don't think, I remember, I've read about this before, about when that became a much bigger thing, and there was still, but they were getting there. But the fact that at this point in time, it's still a new thing to people, that you have to explain that, the whole, like, fingerprints are like snowflakes kind of a thing, that no two can be the same, and all that kind of thing for people. Now, both I know a handful of our listeners, because we have the same work background, but especially speaking for myself, working in a stock photo archive since I was when I was a teenager through my 20s, 30s, and 40s. But I spent the first several years of my life working with a lot of old negatives. And there's one thing I knew, because we had a dark room where we had them processed and done all the time, hundreds, thousands, and everything, every historical photo you can imagine. And sometimes the older photos, the older negatives, the ones that were especially from the 1920s, 30s, a little bit in the 40s too, I think. I don't know if I think in the 50s we might have stopped doing it, but definitely in those earlier decades, they would tend to write on the negative. Sometimes it might be with, a little China marker, whatever it would be. And you would see that in the edge of a photo. Now, usually you try to remove that, or it would get cropped out, or not. You'll also see this a lot when you see, the only thing that people might see it now, if you're going to go look to buy an old timey promotional photo from a movie, from, I don't know, like maybe a still from I don't know, Bringing Up Baby or something, or It Happened One Night. I don't know why one of those two, but they're two very good movies. You might see in the corner, you might see some numbers. You might see a date. You might see something which approximates a negative number that was done by whatever stockhouse, whatever like that. The reason I'm saying it is because when Perry's seeing that, that's so absolutely correct for what they did back then. I love that little detail because I think that's absolutely accurate. Either you were taking it as a news photo for a newspaper or even just cataloging it for, the police department, whatever, you would absolutely write that on the negative. And if you printed it and you reverse it, that is what would happen. It's a great catch. When I realized what was happening, I was like, oh, I can't believe I'm totally relating to this little evidence turn here.
Yeah, I thought it was a real creative way that he had an epiphany and then was able to show it and explain it to the jury, because it's something you don't think about every day, that your fingerprint, if you leave it, is not as you see it. It is, when you leave it, it's the reverse of what you see it. So if the fingerprint appeared perfect in the picture, it should not have been. It would have had to have been reversed.
Right.
And the demonstration he does to get the expert to say, like, there's no possible way you could leave your fingerprint as it exists on your finger on the steering wheel. It would have to have been transferred. That's the first moment where you get the old time movie thing that doesn't happen now, or people go to jail, as you get the murmuring in the courtroom. People go, oh,
and even of course, in classic, in classic TV movie, whatever you want to call it, lawyer style. Because I don't know if you, and maybe occasionally in real life, but maybe not as much anymore. Perry deliberately dropping that line that they're gonna raise objection, and the judge is gonna go, the jury will disregard that last comment. Like, doesn't matter. They heard it. They heard him say, because clearly you could, if this wasn't a trial, you don't need to say, well, who could have possibly done that? I mean, who holds the photos? Well, that's the police. That's who,
right.
But you can't. But so I love him. You're like, well, you're gonna have to say it because now it's in their head. And if you had to do that, then how do we trust other things? That's the other thing. If you can't trust this piece of evidence that they because they screwed around with it, how can you trust anything else that they say? It's a great thing. It's him being crafty, just like Ham said. There you go. Thank you, Ham. Yeah. Case closed. Anyway.
Well, it's the idea that, and I think what this proves in the trial is that even with a guilty client, in the desperation to prove somebody guilty, if you can prove that you've attempted to frame somebody or done something, that may undo the fact that you have a lot of other good evidence if you're the state. And if you're caught cheating and that's held against you, that puts the state's case in jeopardy. And, as a lawyer, have I ever done something similar to, or said something similar to Perry knowing it was going to be objected to? Oh no, Scott! I've never done anything like that ever.
Oh, you're such a good, you're Atticus. You're Atticus. That's you. You're Atticus and I'm Attica. Okay, so I like the fact that I can actually speed through a little bit here because we start the episode kind of with it's the morning of, before everything, and now at this point in the episode, as we're getting closer towards the end of the episode, it's the evening after, and again, and they're in a much different place now. So you have the Della and Anita stuff where they end up in like what apparently looks like a lesbian hotspot, but it's a really darling little moment between them because they're recounting something that one of them said sort of maybe in their sleep, but maybe not, who knows? But the dropping the, oh, I almost forgot I love you too. It's like, oh, she is a screenwriter, because that's like a little line you do in one of your stupid little skits. Myrna Lloyd probably say that anyway. William Powell. Anyway. And then we also get a little Ginny Perry sweetness moment where he shows up at her place. And the great line there in my mind is when it's very noirish. I love is there anything you don't do? Small talk. Oh,
right.
How'd teacher get so cool? How'd she become Barbara Stanwyck in just 5 seconds? I didn't know how that happened. Unlike his two partners for the defense.
Right, exactly.
Drake does not have quite as pleasant an evening. He apparently gets a call because we hear him questioning, kind of like, how did you get my number? How did you, and he leaves to, as we see seconds later, he leaves to go see Perkins. And they've caught Ozzie Jackson. And that's when we have where he decides, because he's Paul, because the guy's like, okay, before we let you do anything or get any information, we want to know about who took the photos. It's like, it's me.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating scene. It's like, okay. And they basically, let's see what you're made of and what you'll do. And they have him, he's basically forced to beat the man for information. He does actually get some pertinent information, some fancy cracker with a hop head for a wife who paid him, I think they said they paid him to stop dealing to her or whatever.
Yes.
And then you start thinking of who that might be, whatever. And then you realize, and he thinks he's gotten all the information. It's that moment he thinks he's got all the information he needs, that he's going to get out of him. And Perkins is like, I don't think you did.
Right.
And you realize he has to continue to beat him. And that's when they finally move away. And you can even hear the fist blows actually landing faster or hard or whatever. And you're like, oh, dear God.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting scene to be horrified on behalf of the person who has to do the hitting. That's something we don't get to see very often. It's usually the other way around. Although I have seen it, but it's rare. And it culminates in this moment when he gets home and he gets into bed with his wife, Clara, who's, it's like, I like the fact that they're both soul consciences for each other.
Yes.
But there's that sentence he says, or sentence, yeah. Well, it is a sentence, so I guess that's grammatically correct. Am I good? And again, it's kind of like what we were saying about the You're Not Serious People when we were having the conversation about the other series that I hope you all watch, whatever. I love simple lines that mean so much more. Those are always the best lines to me. Because considering who we've seen on this series, dude, you are the most good of anyone on this series. More than Perry and Della, and everybody, and certainly everybody else that we've encountered. And the fact that you, perhaps the most moral and ethical person on the show, on the series, is questioning himself, is really striking. And again, as we've said before, it's on her to kind of like guide him and be like,
right,
because she's not gonna have a scene where she's gonna like, come on, wake up. Of course, he was like, no, I like, even though she's kind of probably half asleep and whatever, she still says and does just enough to kind of like, just, even though I think we linger on his eyes being open in a way where he's still replaying what he just did and how this is gonna leave him, maybe not as much of a mark as he left on the dude, but it's going to leave a mark on him.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And, the choice they make, is that in this case, as difficult as it's been so far in everything that's happened this year, I think Paul Drake's had to pay the most. I mean, you think about what he did for the police, and he kind of got hoodwinked. Perry left him hanging. He's been brought back in. He found the gun, had to make a tough choice. He found this out, had to pay this price. I mean, he's really been through the ringer of all of them.
Definitely. I would pretty much have to agree with that. The only, Perry getting hit with what happened with Dodson after the fact is had the most, serious impact on him. But Drake, and the way his life has been impacted so much, I mean, yeah, Perry had to move off the farm, but whatever. We get to the final few strokes of this episode, and in the first one we get to see Strickland and Milligan together. I think we did see Strickland briefly earlier in the episode, just watching. And the basic conversation between them is Milligan asking him about how well he knows Mason, and about whether the two of them talk shop. We know what that means. And when, Strickland indicates, they have from time to time, or they used to, whatever, shut the door. Yeah. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out, because, ultimately, which way does Strickland go? Strickland is a wild card here. We cannot assume one way or the other.
No, you can't.
Because we've generally speaking, we very much have liked him as a character, but, who's he going to put first? remember the scene he had with Perry in a previous episode. You know, does he do something which could pretty much damage his working life from this point on if he goes against what Milligan is going to ask him to do? It's very interesting. I'm right now. It's probably the thing I'm most, other than who's that shadowy figure and who are they working on behalf of and all that stuff, which is the classic mystery kind of moment of it. This to me is the most intriguing thing going into the next week for me. Is like, okay, I'm curious where they're going to go with the Strickland thing.
I have a feeling that Milligan's going to ask Strickland to float something to Perry that is the wrong thing to do or the wrong thing to say, like maybe give him bad information about a witness so he ends up tanking a cross-examination or something.
And it could be something that he can get away with doing, that it won't appear that he did it deliberately.
Yes, exactly.
I think that would be it. Because he's, quite frankly, he's already done the reverse. He's already given Perry a few little heads ups on things, even though he felt like he wasn't supposed to, but he did anyway. So in a way, Strickland could probably do that in his own mind, kind of, evening the score, so to speak. Okay, I did this and I probably shouldn't have, but if I do this, it's the Jimmy McGill way of rationalizing behavior.
Right. Well, I mean, in the middle of trial, if somebody tells you something you don't know or says like, this is coming, your instinct's going to be to prepare for it and worry about it.
Right. Absolutely. Last two things about the episode: Della coming home, and we see the poor forgotten Hazel, which made me kind of think, giving Della a pass all this season. It's an explicit podcast. I can talk the way I want to talk. She's been kind of shitty to this person this whole fucking time.
Oh yeah, big time.
And as we see, it's not like Hazel is this, bad, annoying, horrible, whatever. It's like, no, she might not be as exciting because she's not, because Anita's part of the Hollywood life at this point, even though she has to live a certain way. But look where she gets to go. Look what she gets to do, who she works with. She's still in the Hollywood scene, whatever. There's something, she's very funny and exciting, whatever. Maybe Hazel isn't quite that, but give Hazel credit when, she even gives Della the chance to be honest about things, and she's not. And Hazel knows full well she's lying, and that's when she calls her a fucking coward. And I have to admit, I there was a little piece of me that kind of cheers, like, yeah, kind of is, just, you can, just end things with her. You clearly, if that's, don't, look, I'm not parochial or whatever the word is, or, whatever. But whenever you have characters in all the shows that we've watched over the last 25 years, and they're married and they're adult and they commit adultery constantly, or they're not, but they're just cheating, whatever, with very few exceptions, because there's always a few. Can't help but think, and it could be the person we're rooting for now. It's like, just end things with the other person already. Why do you do that? And, it always bothered me. I mean, I've even known people in real life over the years. I'm always like, oh, why are you doing that? Just whatever. Because the potential damage you might do. And this is damage that Della might have done here with Hazel. But, I'm wondering if that's going to be it for them. I guess we'll see.
No, I agree with you. I mean, my sympathies were with Hazel in that moment. And as you said, I think we've kind of, because they haven't brought Hazel into the forefront, we've kind of had that on the back burner and not had to face it
right
until that moment. But in that moment, it suddenly all came back. Like, think of all the nights she's been gone, all the lies she's had to tell, like going away a
she's been gone.
Yeah.
Again, and it all kind of goes away if she's honest there and just deals with it. And when she's not, any sympathy or preference I would have had for Della in that moment goes out the window. It's like, no, because she clearly knows. You're not, because if you who have been so perceptive before aren't picking up on that, and that you lying again here, because remember, whenever you have these situations in relationships, it's always the lie that's the bigger deal. It's always the lie. It's, it happens again. Anyway, let's want to get to the last scene so we can wrap up, because I thought it was a beautiful little way they did it. Perry comes home himself, and he hears that sound in the other room, and we're waiting. And I loved it because I kept thinking, who's going to be sitting there? Someone's sitting there. Nobody's sitting there, but the train is running. And I love I love it's just running in that, it's just that pure circular tracks just running around. And there's that cigarette that's lit and smoking there, which means whoever was there, they couldn't have been there that long ago.
Right.
And I was going, and I love it because all the cliche things, the house wasn't torn apart or anything like that, whatever. Someone just wanted to put it there. It's like, someone can get to you. And they were there. And they gave you a break, but they probably knew you were. I really thought that was a very kind of interesting little moment there.
Yeah, and that thing in the middle of the tracks is very reminiscent of the oil well from the McCutcheon.
Oh yeah. I thought of it like a watchtower from a concentration. Anyway, so yeah, and that was actually the episode. And then I think the image with the final credits was it a burning pair of child shoes representing the Gallardo daughter? Is that what that was supposed to be? I'm assuming.
I didn't know if it was that or if it was Ozzie Jackson was dead and they were burning his shoes.
They didn't look like Chuck Taylor's to me. But
they didn't either, but I don't know what they looked like at that time.
Yeah, they looked. I thought it was a child's shoes, so I thought it represented. But it could be the Chuck Taylor's. It could be.
But since she died in a fire, I think their idea makes more sense.
I wasn't under the impression they were going to kill Jackson. I thought they were just going to beat him up some. So, alrighty then. All right, so we made up for it with the. Hey, we're done. So, if you enjoyed this podcast, guess what? You'll enjoy hanging out on our Facebook page as well. It's the Serious TV Drama Podcast page. Like the page and join the conversation about shows like Perry Mason, like Succession, and so many more. Where can you find us? You can find us on most major podcast platforms. The two I like to point out always are Apple Podcasts, because I love when people can rate and review us there. And as far as everything else, you can go to simply podbean.com. You can punch in Serious TV Drama. Guess what? You can just punch in STVD. That works. And that works on the Apple Podcast too. It's amazing. And voila. But on Podbean, you'll be able to access all 374 of our podcasts. We've got about 24 that are actually good. 25 maybe? I don't know. Maybe tonight's number 25. Oh, and by the way, because I have to self-promote, you can also find my other podcasting project extraordinaire there as well, and also on other platforms. Scott Forgot the 80s. Just remember, Scott begins with one T. Wow, has one T. Oh my God, to Scott. Anyway, back to STVD. You can follow us on Instagram. Serious TV Drama is the word there, and on Twitter, our handle is at STVD Podcast. Again, STVD as in Serious TV Drama. We will be back next week with the next episodes of both Succession and Perry Mason. Brian, I think this was one of our stronger efforts. I'm very proud of this one. Unlike last week, which I think we sucked. No, I'm just kidding. And of course, it's largely due to your presence. So I thank you for joining me once again.
Well, in the words of Connor Roy, look who's back, the Rebel Alliance. So we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks to you. Thanks to everybody. Good night, everybody.